Hello and welcome once again to the AtlantaCast. This is season 1, episode 4, I believe. Yeah. I forget the title of this one. Tell
The
me.
Streisand Effect.
Yeah, what he said.
You want me to tell you what that means?
I actually was going to ask. Yeah, I do not know what the Streisand effect means.
I'm actually old enough to remember who Barbara Streisand is, she's still alive. So the Streisand Effect, and the audience can obviously wiki this. It references the phenomenon of psychological reactance, wherein once people are aware that some information is being kept from them, they are significantly more motivated to
I know
access
this.
and spread that information. And I'll just read this paragraph shortly because it's kind of interesting. Because this person, Barbara Streisand, she was an actress back in the 80s and 90s, I guess, became controversial because she protested the Vietnam War and actually had some pictures taken in front of some North Vietnamese military stuff. So she actually, even to this day, is kind of hated by Vietnam War veterans. But anyway, she became very wealthy, bought property along the coast in California, and at one point was suing the state of California to have aerial photographs of her mansion removed from the state records.
Yes.
So the California Coastal Commission was studying like erosion or something along the coastline, and they had photographed her house. They had aerial footage, and she didn't want people to know where she lived. So she actually went to court to sue them to have the picture removed, and it became such a public thing that more people actually ended up seeing the site. And according to the Wikipedia page, it says, as a result of the case, public knowledge of the picture increased greatly. More than 420,000 people visited the site over the following month. The lawsuit was dismissed, and Streisand was ordered to pay attorney fees, which amounted to $155,000. So she just wanted the picture removed. She ended up it was a self-defeating thing. So it's an interesting title because knowing that I don't know if I really understand why they titled it this way.
Well, I was going to say, I think knowing that, now that you reminded me, I immediately went to the connection of Al with this Zan guy, where as soon as Al, specifically, this is, I think this is in reference to the way that the way that people online will get quote unquote baited by quote unquote trolls. And I say this, I actually did make note of this as a central part of this episode because Ern says to Al when he's kind of going off, they learn that this guy Zan is trashing Al or making fun of him in some way on Twitter, and Al is not taking it lightly, and he's just like sitting on the couch furiously typing on his phone, and Ern says, "Hey, don't get baited, or don't bait this dude. You'll only make it worse." And Al just continues typing on his phone, and then the entire rest of the episode for Al is him following around this Zan guy,
obsessing about this.
Exactly. And
I don't know. I mean, not to give it away already, but I mean, does it really make it worse?
The viewers have seen this episode. We can talk about.
I mean, does his obsession with Zan's posting really end up hurting him? I mean, maybe we find out in subsequent episodes.
Well, this is kind of what I think the main thesis of this episode is that with Al, he's mainly concerned about how this guy's posting affects his livelihood, and I think that ultimately speaking, other people just doing general social media coverage of you, whether it's positive or negative, doesn't really affect you, affect your career. When you look at people's careers being ended online, it's usually because something was found out that they did in real life. Whereas, people just like making fun of you a bunch on the internet usually, like oftentimes, gives you more of a signal boost and it makes you more popular. It gives you more opportunity to capitalize on that attention. But like, negative attention isn't like necessarily bad for anything except your ego. And it's just that Al cares a lot about his ego. He cares a lot about feeling like people are seeing him authentically. I, mentioned this in, I think episode 2, but this is kind of like this whole episode is kind of like the crystallization of like, everything Al's been kind of like dealing with under the surface up until now, I think. And, since it's like a rewatch, I've definitely been picking up on that stuff earlier than like this episode. But this episode is the one that's like, okay, if you don't understand what Al's like main conflict with being a creator is at this point, like, I don't know what to tell you. You're lost.
So episode 4, it opens with Ern and Alfred smoking weed behind a club. It's Paperboy or Alfred. I'll be using the two names interchangeably, but he comes out of the club. It's not clear to me if he was actually performing. I assume he was in the middle of a performance or he's taking a break from a performance. But they are smoking weed and they're approached by this guy Zan, and he's a young man of mixed race. My immediate take was that he's probably half Asian, half black, but I mean, definitely Asian, maybe Taiwanese, if I had to guess.
I don't think what his actual like race is matters as much as the fact that the other characters can't seem to pin him down.
Right, and that's why
the entire episode, everybody is speculating on, is he... I think Darius thought he was Chinese at one point because they were going to, or I don't know if that was that. I just know they were going to like a Chinese sort of black marketplace or something to trade in this sword that they had gotten. And Darius, like, there's a lot of this episode, shows the characters kind of just like casually talking about race in ways that like you would never see white people doing.
Correct.
And I think that like. I'm going to point out people's race as I go, but I mean, only because it's necessary to talk about a show like this.
I mean, there are numerous times where I don't think it matters. I have that same thought. Well, why does it matter what the race of this person is? But I mean, I guess for the listener's
the reason it matters is because it matters to the characters.
Well, for our ability to discuss these episodes, we're going to have to point out people's race. I mean, so I would say unless I point it out, the person is probably African American. But this person in particular, this Zan person, it's the topic of conversation amongst all the main characters in this episode is like, what is this guy's racial background? But anyway, let's just get through this first scene. So Zan interrupts the conversation between Paperboy and Ern. He introduces himself. He has a beanie, a hat on with a patch that says Zan Sexual, and he's got like a big smile on his face. He recognizes Paperboy, he congratulates him about his music, but Paperboy is immediately suspicious because he doesn't know this guy. Zan refers to himself using the N-word at one point. Paperboy questions his race. Zan offers him a hat, and this one actually says Zan Life. So, like, I didn't catch that at first, but he actually has different logos or different things on these hats that he's giving away. So this guy is clearly promoting himself. And then he flashes his phone with an old Arthur cartoon meme that says, and I had to write this down, but when your bae scrolls through the DMs, and bae, Chris probably, sorry, you can edit that out. You probably know what bae means. I actually had to look it up. I always thought that just meant baby or like, my number one, but what is it?
I mean, I think that's like approximating.
It's before anyone else.
Yeah.
Unless you're in the medical profession.
I didn't know it was an acronym, but
yeah. Yeah, I didn't know either. I just thought it meant baby.
I just knew it was. I mean, yeah, basically.
I think those are interchangeably, but it's funny because you also get a list of other acronyms, which, not to digress, but bacon and eggs, barium enema, Bachelor of Aeronautical Engineering is BAE. So anyway, but he's clearly like trying to impress these guys with his social media profile, and it's funny. It's funny. Well, the meme that he shows, really, I didn't get it either. I had to pause the video to look at it. When your bae scrolls through the DMs being direct messages.
I think it's supposed to be nonsense.
I mean, and I think for this discussion it doesn't matter, but it's funny because Ern actually questioned him. He was trying to analyze it.
That's what I was gonna say, is that Ern is like, what the hell does this mean? And like, it is like, I think, just unbelievably obvious that it doesn't matter what it means, because like, he's just putting anything and everything out onto the internet in order to gain clout, or in order to, retain
and he even says
watch time and high clicks and stuff. No, yeah,
he says, whatever, exactly. I got the likes.
Yeah, exactly. So like, it doesn't matter at all. Like, the whole point of it is that it's nothing content, and there are a lot of
there's a lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I just off of like the top of my head, I remember hearing about a guy on Facebook who would make like videos that are supposed to be like selfless, like he's being like a hero and stuff. And there's one video of him acting as like a fireman, and where the camera is set up in the hallway, and he's like, oh, there's somebody on the other side here, and there's smoke coming out of the door, and he like runs in, and then it's just like 10 minutes of like nothing, of just looking at that same shot of the hallway, and he's like in the other room, and then after 10 minutes he just like comes out. After like 10 minutes he just like comes out the door with carrying like a woman, and that's just like the end of the video. And it's like, if you were to watch the entire thing, you would have just watched 10 minutes of like a hallway with a door and there's some smoke coming out of it. And the thing is, like, on the few occasions I do not use like Facebook or Snapchat or anything, those apps offend me on a deep personal level. I feel visceral pain thinking about any time that I've wasted on these apps. But on very few occasions, I have like gone onto the home stories of these apps, and I just remember one time specifically, this scarred me for life. On Snapchat, I just like opened it, and there was just some person like doing that like candle cleansing thing. Have you seen this? They like
candle cleansing.
The idea is that like somebody
taking wax out of your ears.
Well, yeah, like,
is that what it is?
They'll
stick a candle in your ear and light it.
Yeah, they stick a candle and then they light the other end, and it's supposed to suck wax out of your ear, right? And this person was doing this kind of thing, but like to someone's belly button, and it was supposed to like clean out their belly button. And what this guy does is he like takes a piece of paper and like rolls it up, and then like sprinkles some like lemon, just like a bunch of random shit, like lemon juice, and then like baking soda and like salt, and then some like mystery powder or whatever and stuff like that. And then he like puts it all up, and he like puts a candle like in the piece of paper and like lights it. And the entire time, like, the woman is being like, whoa, that feels weird, like, what are you doing? And there's like a guy sitting next to her like, oh, just like don't worry, it's fine, like, it's gonna be such a crazy payoff, this is so gonna be worth it. And it goes on for like 10 minutes, and I just like sat there, and I was like no. I am consciously giving this video the chance to impress me. And like at the very end of it, he pulls the piece of paper off of this woman's belly button, and there's like a bunch of like weird gunk and shit in there, and she's like, whoa, that was all in my belly button? And he was like, yeah. And like, it was unbelievably obvious that it was just all of the stuff that he poured into her belly button before lighting the candle. Like, he just like, it was lemon, it was like baking soda, lemon juice, salt, and like all of this other random shit, and he puts it. And the point is,
you just proved Zan's point, because you're talking about it, and it's a bunch of horse shit.
Well, this was a one-time thing for me. I'm not part of the problem. Everybody else is. Okay.
Everybody else is
All
the
right.
problem.
No. See, I was observing purely scientifically for the purpose of gathering data on a culture that I do not understand whatsoever. I am not a participant. I am absolved of all.
Well, Zan obviously gets it because there's a lot of people clicking on these things and a lot of likes. After that first scene, my immediately
and you know what I think
was he's a narcissist. And everybody's a narcissist.
I don't think he's a narcissist. Well, okay, I do think it takes a certain type of person to be this kind of content creator, and you do kind of have to be full of yourself. But I don't think that that's like his sin. I think that's an attribute of him. I think his sin is that he's an opportunist.
Yes.
To the like most extreme like you could possibly be, to the point where he, at one point in the episode, says that like he records everything, and this is a sentiment that's shared. If you kind of go on to the podcasts that big YouTubers hold, where they kind of talk about their creative process, or you like listen to the clips from, or like you actually go in and listen to their streams or their Ask Me Anything and stuff like that, and like. I mean, yes, but also, I mean, especially you see this with streaming culture now, but like, if a lot of them will talk about the way that they create content, and they will make, everything they possibly can. Everything. This is like a serious kind of like a problem that a lot of content creators face, is that they've gotten to a point where they feel like they can't do anything in life without it being a missed opportunity for content. And this is especially apparent in in content creators who are like, the thing that they're making is like they're selling their life, or I mean, not like they're selling their soul, but like they're making videos about their life, and and like, the thing that people are watching them for is like to get attached to this human person, and so like now
it started off with the selfie, and then it just became a
kind of and it's like once people start saying like, oh, I want to listen, like if you make just eating lunch, like that could be a video where it's like I made the weirdest sandwich and ate it. That could be views. That could be money, right? And that's a temptation for a lot of people, and it's kind of like a pull that some people deal with. But then there are people like Zan who give into that completely, and they don't care whatsoever about being inauthentic, or about allowing allowing their life to be completely consumed by creating content for social media, because it does see benefits. Social media like very much so rewards this type of content. YouTube rewards watch time, which means making videos that are just 8 minutes of nothing. If people will watch it, then YouTube does not care. Snapchat doesn't care. Facebook doesn't care.
Zan is an interesting contrast to Paperboy, because Paperboy is I mean, it doesn't seem right to me to call him old school, but relative to Zan, he is old school. He doesn't understand the social media monetization strategy and that kind of thing. He wants to make his rap music. I think he doesn't understand.
Well, I do think he doesn't really. I think he understands social media well enough. Like, he clearly knows how to use Twitter and stuff, but he doesn't really use Instagram so much.
He views it as exploitation, and he uses that word.
Well, yeah,
times.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think I would say he's entirely right to call it that, especially when we get to like Zan using this kid as a means of creating content.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Like I would say that Zan's, like his biggest flaw is that he is an opportunist to the worst degree. But I think that like the point when it like crosses over towards him being a truly like abhorrent person is in, involving kids with his content creation. Because like, I don't know if you've seen, there are some accounts and social media channels that like their entire goal is to make videos about like their kids unboxing like toys.
Oh, right.
These kinds
unboxing
of channels.
Videos.
Exactly. Yeah. Or just videos that are like they're generally known as like family YouTube channels, where the entire conceit of the channel is just following this family around in their daily life. and a lot of the time, like when there are kids involved, it can get very exploitative and
Yes.
very genuinely like scary for the kids. It often is like it can be very scarring.
Do you view this as a supply problem or a demand problem? Like, is this a sickness on the part of the viewers, like tuning into this stuff repeatedly, or the opportunists who are preying on the psychology of it?
I think it is a little bit of both of those things. Mostly the social media like conglomerates that have created systems which encourage this kind of behavior.
So Mark Zuckerberg, like
I guess,
his psychology.
But also mostly I would say it's like it's kind of like the Onceler effect, where if it's not Zan, it's gonna be somebody else. You know, we've already established, especially in a show like Atlanta, that people will do whatever they can to get by, right? And they even say in this episode, Al is exploiting his situation for money, because like he describes it himself as like rapping is what I have to do to like survive, or like this is all I have. Something to the I don't remember the exact line.
That's
and then Zan fires back at him by saying, well, me exploiting you doing your career is the way that I have to make my money. This is the lifestyle that I've found myself in, and and this is the other thing that I think kind of ties the whole episode together, is that with Ern's whole arc this episode is about following Darius to do this what ends up being like a money investment thing, right? Yeah. Where Ern has some amount of money, and he's going to trade in some stuff at a pawn shop for some money, and Darius says, hey, actually get this sword, and he's like looking at a sword in the pawn shop, and he says, I can trade this, or I can get you more money for this than what it costs. And Ern is like, okay, I trust you. And then they go and trade it with this Chinese sort of black market thing for a dog, this sword for a dog, and then Darius like gives this dog to this random guy out in like this random like white guy out in the countryside or something, who has another dog, and he's supposedly going to breed these two dogs together and sell the pups, which will take several months, right? But the thing is, Ern doesn't know this, and by the end of the episode, when he learns that this is what's going on, he realizes that he's in a really, really bad situation, because Lottie and Van needed that money now. And I think that kind of goes to like show that poor people don't have like the opportunity to invest much of the time. And the thing that like kind of gets Ern out of this situation, like the thing that like his saving grace in this episode, is that Darius is generous enough to lend him his phone so that he can pawn it in for more money. And like Ern, just like the way that Donald Glover like says thank you in this scene is just like really, really well done. You can tell that he's just like, he's so relieved, and like this actually is like a really, really big deal to him. He is very poor, as we established like in the past episode.
So let's back up so we can go through that, like how we get to that final scene.
Well, hang on, like I'll just like connect this. What I mean is that Zan and Al, I think, are both in a situation where like if they were to like if Zan were to say like, oh, what I'm doing right now is wrong, exploiting like kids and making and being disingenuous to people online and playing into this system of watch time retention and stuff like that. If he decided that's bad, I should stop doing that, I feel like it's pretty likely that he doesn't really have the means or the knowledge to get himself in a better position. Like it is some other job that would pay even like close to as much as what he's assumedly getting doing social media stuff. And similarly with Al.
You're drawing a connection between Ern and Zan?
Well, I'm saying that I guess I'm drawing a connection between all of the characters in this episode, because they're all poor and they're all doing like everything they can to get by. And when you're doing everything you can to get by, like your options are limited, and just having like opportunities surrounding you might not necessarily be like enough to get you out of the state of poverty that you might be in, because like just taking the time out of your day to like pursue another career, another like job opportunity, that like weekend off that you take from your job to like go get a suit and like go to a job application or an interview or whatever, like that's an entire day of work that you won't be getting from the job that might be supporting you currently. And for people who are this poor, like that could like that living paycheck to paycheck, like that makes a really big difference. That can be the difference between, making rent or not. That can be the difference between being able to like feed your kid or not.
But you got Zan, who, despite being sort of a blatant opportunist, he is actually, there's something to be admired about that guy, because he's like an entrepreneur of sorts, and
like
he doesn't have an obvious skill other than talking and smiling and self-promoting.
Yeah, as much of an asshole and as annoying as Zan is, like he is just playing into the systems that were laid out for him, and there is an admiration in that.
Paperboy. Mm-hmm. We're both hustling, I think is what he said.
Yeah, so that's why I say that, like, obviously it can be taken too far, and I think that's the distinction between any of the characters that we know thus far and Zan, which is that Zan is willing to kind of involve other people, and like specifically kids, and like that's like whatever he's doing with this kid is definitely going to damage that kid moving forward. He's normalizing like this kid saying extremely offensive things, like he's given him like a catchphrase that involves a bunch of expletives that are apparently so vulgar they can't even be shown in the show.
That was funny.
I think that's funny, and it's also kind of a neat little sort of like show making trick, because I think, okay, here's what I'm thinking happened. That kid's like parents were like, we don't want our kid to be to be on air saying all of this, like, well, I guess he does say bitch. I don't know, maybe. But like either way, bleeping out what this kid says, even though like in the rest of the show, like everybody else, they say fuck, they say the N-word. But like this kid isn't allowed to say that without being censored. And I think that that's maybe supposed to put us in the headspace of seeing him say that on social media, because like, bleeping out expletives on social media, it's like expletives isn't advertiser friendly. So that's why a lot of content creators will like, will make their content as like provocative as possible, but also censor the most provocative elements of it. Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go back, because I like to go through this sort of linearly, because I think each one of these episodes does have its own
I like to bounce
arc
around wherever I feel like.
So let's go back to, all right, well, we got past the first scene with Zan. Ern is in the apartment. He wakes up on the couch, and Al is furiously responding to Zan's online criticism. Darius is eating breakfast out of a mug, which is weird. But Ern and Darius depart. They're driving off, apparently to this pawn shop. We don't know that immediately, but they have this weird conversation about Steve McQueen. And I don't know, do you know who Steve? You have to be somebody my age to know who Steve McQueen is.
Steve McQueen
He's a 1970s actor. He was the quote king of cool. He was infamous for the number of women that he bedded. And Darius apparently knows him, but he claims that black people don't know Steve McQueen, but he does, because he's Nigerian. Which Ern like kind of like says, well, okay.
I don't know if this is the first time that that Darius has described himself as Nigerian, or that I don't know if this is where we find out that Darius is Nigerian.
I think he said it once before, but maybe not. But yeah,
I can't remember. But
it comes back again more than just this episode too.
But either way, I think that like this, within the context of this conversation specifically, where he's saying black people don't know who Steve McQueen is, but I do because I'm Nigerian, is like drawing a very clear line between Darius and black people, which is kind of a like cultural identification that this show explores more on, especially in like later episodes and later seasons, is kind of the idea of what really defines blackness. You know, is it the color of your skin? Is it the way that the greater American society sort of like sees you? Because obviously, to larger society, if you didn't know that Darius was from Nigeria and you like saw him standing next to Al and Ern and stuff like that, most people would just say they're all black, right? Including the characters within this show, and especially like people who aren't as familiar with the culture that they're from, and like us, who aren't as good at distinguishing.
This is a veiled reference to what he might describe as the superiority of Nigerians compared to African Americans. And this is an interesting thing. Like,
I've never heard of this particularly.
This is really interesting because, I mean, I use the term superiority loosely, but in terms of how well Nigerians who come, at least the ones that come to America, and this may be like a self-selecting group, but Nigerians in the United States outperform whites and Hispanics. They're only second to Asians as far as their
I was gonna say, is that like an Asian American thing? Because I know that like Asian households on average like make more or have more lucrative jobs or something.
But this is like a confounding thing when it comes to the narrative about black-skinned people not being able to win, as Ern might say, because I don't know about Darius specifically. I mean, he's kind of a different cat. I mean, in this episode alone, he has some entrepreneurial spirit as well. I mean, even though you don't see it as like smart business, Darius is actually trading up his sword, and he's thinking in terms of investment. But I mean, going back to the comment about him being Nigerian, if you do follow like the statistics and how different groups in the United States are doing, it's pretty remarkable to look at how well off Nigerians are that come to this country, and it'll come back in later episodes as well.
I do think it's also worth mentioning. I do think it's also worth considering that like this is something that I've heard from some channels that were kind of making response videos to like people who thought the Great Replacement was like a real thing, but like they were mentioning that like with Asian people specifically, part of the reason why there's kind of like a what's the word, like a positive stereotype of like quote unquote positive, because there's no such thing as a positive stereotype, but like the whole idea of like a positive stereotype of like Asian Americans being like more successful and stuff is partly generated by like people who are wealthy enough to actually move to America. Like that's an opportunity that not everybody has. Poor people who are just born in America, like African Americans, because of like the transatlantic slave trade, a bunch of African Americans were brought to America, and then like they were just already there, right? And so if you were born into like into an African American family, you were just born into America. But like if you're a Nigerian born in Nigeria and then you moved to America, you at the very least had the means to move to another country. And like especially if you don't share a land border with that country, with like Mexico, or well, I guess Mexico is the only one that like shares a significant border with like America. But like when it comes to like the Atlantic, it's like that's an ocean where you can't like make the walk on foot. You need to like get on a boat or a plane or something.
So you're saying that the excellent performance or income level that Nigerians have is because those that were capable of crossing the ocean and
like they already were at like a higher level of of wealth or opportunity than some people.
I don't know if that
and that's
explains.
just that's
like
just what I've
came to this
heard.
country.
I don't know.
Yeah, no,
I
that is the argument against it. But
I haven't looked into
I mean,
actual data.
the point is, it confounds the narrative about just the color of your skin, meaning
but like I think it also kind of gets in. I think it also contributes to what the show what I think this moment of Darius kind of putting himself in a separate category from black people, quote unquote, is that like he is kind of classifying himself outside of the culture of blackness. Like he's clearly still able to be a participant in it. And I think that's because he looks like, a black person. People consider him, like people who don't know that he's from Nigeria just call him black, right? But he, and especially as like the show goes on, he has like a culture outside of African American, which is Nigerian, exactly. Right? And other episodes will get more into this and stuff, so I won't go too deeply into it. But like, what defines blackness is like a really big point of like exploration for this show.
And this episode really lays out some sort of gray areas where like half black people, like there's a lot of this that comes up, like is that person black or not? Are they allowed to say the N-word or not? I think black, and that seems to be a recurring theme as well.
The N-word is such like a distillation of all of that, because it's just like, can you, or because the whole idea of like the N-word is something that was like it's a derogatory term that was used to describe slaves. And so it's like, if your heritage, like if your lineage didn't come from slaves, then like, is it really appropriate for you to use the N-word? But then, there's also, you want to consider like, does the greater scope of America see you in the same camp as people who descended from slaves? And so like, when it becomes more like forthright and in your face, with the example of somebody who's maybe mixed race or somebody who's maybe more ambiguous, like Zan, then suddenly like I think all of the bubbles start to like come to the surface, and people start to actually act and talk about like how they're uncomfortable with him saying the N-word, and there's plenty more examples of that.
Yeah, there's a good scene where they're playing pool. Mm-hmm. Paperboy is playing pool with a friend. This is an unidentified character, and they're both like scratching their heads about what this guy's ethnicity is or his race. It's the one guy thinks he's an Indian. Al thinks he's Dominican, and the whoever that friend is that he's playing pool with says, "I don't like Indians that say the N-word." Mm-hmm. Like it. They're clearly presenting like the point of view from African American.
Yeah, and I mean I think that's a valid perspective. Mm-hmm. It's presenting that like they have their own idea of what their identity and culture is, and that's how they define blackness, which is very fair. And when other people who don't kind of belong to that culture, when they quote unquote like have a culture and a country to go back home to, then like they feel like it's reasonable to say like there's like a separation between the two groups.
Here's where again we need input from our audience, especially if you are African American. I mean, what would you, if you could put yourself in the head of an African American watching this show,
well, I mean, I don't think they would have to put themselves in that headspace if they just are African American.
But is it? Yeah. I mean, do you look at Zan and say, what does it matter what his race is?
Yeah.
Or
like
do you look at him?
I'm really interested.
Do you object to his use of the N-word because he kind of looks half black, or maybe he's not at all? Like that. I mean, as a white person watching this, part of me says, why are they obsessing on this guy's race when like nobody seems to be able to figure it out? I mean, I get the misuse of the N-word or the inappropriate use of the N-word. That's definitely
I mean, I'm inclined, and in one of his comedy specials, Donald Glover makes the point that like race isn't about your I can't remember if he said it's not about your genetics, or I think he might have said it's not about the color of your skin, it's about how people treat you. And this is obviously not only Donald Glover wrote for this show, and I think this was like 6 years or something before the creation of Atlanta, so his views could have very much evolved. But in this and also it was a comedy special, it wasn't like a lecture that he was giving. But he mentioned that he made the point that like if he brought up the idea of like, if you saw Barack Obama like stealing your car or something, would you like, nobody would say, hey, somebody stop that mixed guy. Like people would say, hey, somebody stop that black guy, even though Barack Obama has a white parent and a black parent. So like, Donald was making the case that what defines blackness is about how like the greater American culture sees you, and how they would treat you based on the way that you physically like look, right? So based on that argument, Darius would be a fully fledged black man, because him walking like nobody based on like.
I think that's or that's wrong though. I mean, somebody else doesn't define your.
I'm like, just trying to like explain. Well, I mean, the thing is like I think that
it's how the greater culture sees you that defines your identity.
Well, I think that's like a reasonable stance to have. I don't know if I agree with it or not. I don't feel like I really have the right to have. I don't feel like I have nearly enough perspective to have a confident stance on this. But I do know that the
culture
way that
is an ill-defined thing. There's definitely gray areas, and I think that's what the episode is kind of dancing around.
I just
like,
mean like
what is,
the
what
way
is blackness
that, like. Okay, well, I'll just say like white people then. Okay, like the way that white people view black people does have an effect on like how they're treated. The whole.
But that doesn't define their culture.
Well, I feel like a lot of black people definitely consider. Well, I mean, later on in the show, I don't want to spoil it, but a comment is made that getting shot by the police is the blackest thing a man can do. I know you know what episode I'm talking about,
yes,
right? So like, I'm trying to like keep the argument like within what I feel like the show and the creators have argued. But I think that like, based on that, one could say that it is kind of a part of the black culture is how they're treated by like the rest of American society. And I personally feel like that lines up decently well, because what defines African Americans outside of just Africans or people from any like African country who they may look the same, is that African Americans, their culture was like grown from the ground up in America, not in like another country. And so like, if the greater like American like culture is going to view you in the same way as somebody else who doesn't share your cultural heritage just because you like look the same, then like you might there's an argument to be made that like African people like then you could say like they're not black or they're not African American or something like that.
Well, I mean, I'll disagree with you on the idea that white America gets to define black culture. I mean, there may be stereotypes.
I definitely think ultimately. I definitely think ultimately, like you should, like any culture should be able to define what like they are for themselves.
I mean, there's no. It's it's a Venn diagram. At some level, things overlap.
Yeah.
Like, but what is specific to black culture versus what is specific to white culture? Where those two circles, what they don't overlap, that has nothing to do with like what somebody might, how somebody might profile you or what the stereotype of you might be.
I mean, I don't know, like white people brought black people away from Africa to America, or like at the time they were just like black people, and then like they mistreated them for hundreds of years, well like 200 years. Like I feel like
I don't, maybe you don't, maybe we have a different definition of the word culture.
Maybe
culture, what culture is like a set of uh, behaviors, unique.
Yeah. I mean,
Unique.
like I feel like if your culture was, sort of was enslaved for a was enslaved for a prolonged period of time, that's going to have a massive impact on like how that culture develops, right?
Yeah, I
And if
agree
it
with
was
that.
enslaved by like
Of
by
course,
another culture,
slavery had
then
a huge impact
yeah.
on the people that came here.
And then
Or
it wasn't just slavery, it lasted into like Jim Crow era laws kind of stuff, and like the legalization of like interracial marriage and stuff like that. So like within black culture, it could be considered that like I know that historically there were these things called brown paper bag parties or something like that, where the idea was that you would or wouldn't be allowed into a party based on if your skin was darker or lighter than the color of a paper bag. And that was kind of like a form of colorism within the African American community, and I think the early 1900s. I'm not sure, um, but the idea was like the idealization of just lighter colored skin, which obviously shouldn't, obviously any kind of colorism is bad, but that was like a form of how people were defining what was and wasn't black at the time, or I guess within the black community defining what was and wasn't good for a black person to be, which was that like lighter colored skin means that you're a better black person and darker colored skin means worse. And that was the
I think
result of
you're describing like racism in like profiling and
well, yeah, I mean, like I think that's
prejudices. And
I mean, yeah, I think that's a pretty integral part of like, and again, like I'm not a member of the African American community. It's just like what I'm watching in this show and like what I've heard.
well,
From
like black, like rap culture, which is central to this part
have
of.
you listened to Pimp a Butterfly?
No, I haven't. But I mean, rap culture is like predominantly part of it. It's predominantly associated with black culture, or I mean, but that's somewhat well, that's largely unique to black culture, right? There's a lot fewer white rappers. I mean, they're out there, but that would be a cultural something unique that's unique to the African Americans. It has nothing to do with like what white people think about black people. It's something that's unique to their culture. Like
I'm
jazz
going to
music
read
was.
you. I just pulled up. I'm going to read you a verse from Childish Gambino, aka Donald Glover's song "Backpackers." Change my ID for the cops. It's not enough yet. Black male in short shorts. I'm double suspect.
Okay.
Do you get what that
Translate?
means? He's saying, like in a hip hop song, he's saying that
He's
black
being
males.
profiled by cops.
Yeah, exactly. He's saying black males are unjustly profiled by the police.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, there's injustices, but I think we're just having a disconnect on what the proper use of the word culture is.
I feel like, well, I mean, you brought up the example of like hip hop and rap as an integral part of like the African American culture. And I mean, I'm just showing it from like the main creative mind behind the show Atlanta. Like it seems like he's very clearly pairing.
So if you ask, and again,
with,
here's a question for our black audience, if we even have one, is do you define your part as part of your culture? Is that
is part of the African American culture that it is oppressed by the greater American culture?
Is that part of your self-identity? And I hope it's not. I mean, I understand that has happened.
I mean, it would definitely be sad, like that's a bad thing for a defining aspect of a culture is that to be that it is oppressed by another. But I mean,
I just I mean that
I wouldn't be
that
surprised.
Can be true, and everybody can acknowledge that there's discrimination and that historically there was, Jim Crow laws. Everybody can agree with that, but I don't see where that has to be part of the defining part of your culture, you know.
I mean, I guess I would just assume that if it's something that you can really clearly trace to the way that it's like affected your life, and like if you have like uh very if you have very like life-shaping experiences that are like clearly connected to the way that people like see you based on your race, then like I think it's reasonable for people to sort of identify themselves as somebody, like to have those experiences be contributed to what you consider as your own identity. And I mean, like, you know, Jim Crow, like interracial marriage, I think in Jim Crow laws, they weren't like abolished until the 1960s, right?
I think that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
the whole civil rights era.
So like
that was 60s.
there are people who are alive today who like when they were kids, you know, they're like interracial marriage like wasn't a thing, and like black and white people still had to drink from separate water fountains. Like it's a pretty fresh like the like discrimination that black people have faced like is still very like the effects of it I think are still like clearly felt. And I personally like I wouldn't be surprised if somebody felt like they kind of define themselves. I mean, you know, when I say like define themselves, I don't mean like people consider themselves as like 100% like my entire identity is that I am oppressed by white people. But like I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of an attribute of it.
Well,
and I think
yeah,
I would assume
culture.
I think that what I'm reading into Atlanta is that like the show is at the very least like validating that perspective. I don't know necessarily if Atlanta agrees with that. I've said this before. I think Atlanta is all about like raising questions, but it is in the same vein. It's about like, I think it's also about like not saying that any particular perspective or worldview is just incorrect. As is the case with like Zan, you know, I think he's definitely portrayed as annoying and an asshole. But if you really, if you dig into why he's doing what he's doing, you know, like we were talking about, there's definitely an element of like he's human, and he's not just like doing this. He's not just he's playing into the systems that were built around him. He's not just annoying and an asshole in a vacuum. It's because of the circumstances in which he found himself.
Yeah. All right.
At least mostly.
Let's go back to the storyline, which I'm scanning down my notes here again. So yeah, we're in a warehouse. Ern and Darius go in there to exchange, or to presumably to sell this sword, but then instead of selling the sword, Darius takes a trade for this very large dog, which appears to be a mastiff or something. And Ern is kind of in the dark here. He doesn't really know what's going on. They end up taking the dog to some farm, and then that's where Ern finds out that instead of getting money for this dog, they're actually gonna like leave it with this farmer to breed, and then he's gonna expect some return on the investment in several months. And this is obviously upsetting to Ern because he needs the money now. So that's kind of building on what we already know, that Ern is sort of in dire straits financially. But we do see like a sort of evolving relationship between Ern and Darius, because initially they're not connecting with the discussion. Like earlier when they're in their car, they're talking about Steve McQueen, and then they're talking about this. They have this weird conversation about whether this guy's Chinese, or some conversation about why Chinese, or if Chinese people don't like black people. So there's really, up until this point in the whole series, Darius and Ern have really not connected. But like at the very end of this, whenever Ern expresses his dismay about not having the money, and he's like, "Look, I'm poor. I need the money." and Darius is like kind of apologetic, and he offers him a cell phone that he can trade in for money, uh, and he's trying to tell him that he's going to make money in the end of this, and Ern sort of apologizes and tells Darius that he's been stressed out about this financial thing, and when they sort of separate, Darius gets back in the car and he says now we're friends. I actually caught that the second time around. Like,
oh, you didn't catch it the first time?
No, and it kind of pointed out to me that Darius is at least conscious about this relationship that, like, to this point.
This is yet another example of Darius seeming weirdly aware of the fact that he's in a TV show.
Yeah, could be.
Like, this is the episode, like, this is the Darius and Ern go on an adventure plot line and become friends by the end of it. And at the end of it, he's like, we're friends now. And it's like, yeah, you are. And it, like...
Yeah, so I don't know if that was the intent of how to finalize that little part of it. But that's kind of where they left it as far as that relationship between Darius and Ern. This episode also, it struck me as similar in some ways to the previous episode, where there was really two storylines going on. The storyline between Al and what's the guy's name, Zan, and his sort of obsession with what was going on social media versus this other storyline about Darius's his poverty. So to wrap up what happened with Paperboy, or Al, he ends up confronting Zan. He tracks him down. The guy in the bar tells him where he works. Al goes to look for him. He finds Zan leaving apparently a pizza place. He's going to be delivering a pizza. Al starts to yell at him and tell him he's upset with what he was doing online. And this Zan guy kind of doesn't get it. He's just like trying to explain to him that this is going to benefit both of them. And it's what you were talking about earlier is the dynamics between Al not really understanding that the social media world as much as this Zan guy who's taking advantage of it and being an opportunist. But then they go off in the car, and there's this little boy in the back seat of the car who initially it appears to be his son. Like, he's has his son with him while he's working, but we find out, like, while they're driving, that no, that's not his son, that's his business partner, the way he described him, and that he's using this little boy to deliver pizzas. And the little boy has some catchphrases which are bleeped out, and Al is just like kind of dumbfounded. You see Al's face, and he's just kind of stunned when this little boy is like spewing out what must be profanities, even though you just hear the beeping sound. And then Al's, I thought it was funny, Al's only response was to tell him to put his seatbelt on. and so then they finally end up actually delivering the pizza. Zan sends the boy out to this apartment. The boy goes up to the front door, and he appears to be robbed, or whoever comes out of the front door just takes the pizza, kind of shakes him down, checks his pockets. And the whole time Zan is filming this on his phone. Like, he's not seemingly that concerned about the little boy, and he's not leaving the car to help him. He just wants to put
I was gonna say, I couldn't tell if this was like staged. Obviously it was staged to an extent, but the guy who took the pizza, I guess.
Good question. I mean,
like,
my
how do you reliably...
first take was that was not staged. That
he actually did take the pizza, but I'm not sure if because like in that case it would kind of be a numbers game. Like, if you're buying pizza, that's kind of like an expense, and Zan strikes me as the guy to like try and maximize profit at all costs. So like, for him to be driving around dropping off pizza, like, what if the people opened the door, saw that it was a kid, and like paid him anyway, you know? I guess then you get paid for the pizza delivery, but like you probably get way more money from like a bunch of clicks on an outrageous video of a little kid getting robbed.
Yeah, good question. I mean, that's kind of a meta analysis. Uh, I mean, just at face value, that was the little boy like going to deliver the pizza, and then the guy like stealing it from him. And it was kind of funny. The boy's out there yelling outside the door, "I know where you live," and so it may very well have been what you're describing, a staged event that was only meant to put up on social media. But I mean, he it, unless the whole premise of Zan being a pizza delivery is fake as well. I mean, I definitely was convinced that was actually his job, but maybe not. Maybe this is all staged. But probably in the end, it doesn't matter to the viewer. I mean, the message was obviously about Paperboy and the reality that there's this social media world out there, and that this is going to be something he has to deal with respect to how he promotes himself and how he deals with fans and other people who are looking to exploit either their own celebrity or paper. In this case, like Paperboy felt like he was being exploited by somebody else. So this probably wasn't my favorite episode, but I mean, there's definitely like
yeah. For as much as I had to say about the few things like that I did talk about, I honestly don't feel like there's that much new stuff that's added in this episode. And part of that is because I kind of pulled apart, knowing in hindsight a lot of the things that I do. Like I feel like Atlanta is it's like jam-packed with characterization in the first part, and then it almost feels like it's kind of like catering more to people who, I don't want to say like weren't paying close enough attention, but they're trying to be like more accessible, I guess, in this episode. This is one of the episodes that feels most like a normal episode of TV. But I mean, I still think it did what it did very well. Like I think, especially on the first time watching this episode, I was like just as engaged as any other episode, and I was able to follow along. It's pretty well. It's just that maybe on a rewatch, it feels maybe a little bit superfluous. But
I was waiting for something more clearly negative to fall out of Al, like texting and responding to Zan's post. Like the title of the episode is the Streisand Effect. That's a phrase that describes something negative that happens when you're trying to cover something up or
the thing is that like the Streisand effect is like the Streisand effect, I think it's describing the people who hear about something that they're not supposed to see and then they go look it up. Normally the Streisand effect is like you're talking about like, oh, the Streisand effect happened to you. That means that you tried to hide something and then that compelled other people to go try to find it themselves. But I think this episode is sort of describing that and applying it to the people who go looking for the information, where Al sees, or I guess the information isn't like trying to be hidden from him either way. So I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah. So that's I think it's a good it's a good issue that it was pursued, or it was represented in a clever way, with this Zan character. So it's it should foster conversation similar to the one we just had about whether it's appropriate or useful or good to have people just posting shit all online, and that's their whole world, that's their job. I mean, part of me thinks that if there's a demand for stuff like that, and you can make money, and especially if you have no other opportunities in front of you, that's a completely legitimate way to make a living. If you're spreading propaganda, or if you're exploiting
Hmm.
other people's living, and Al, said, I think more than once, that he's messing with my business.
Hmm.
He's messing with my life, and
Yeah, I
you
don't
know,
think. Yeah, personally, I feel like he's not really messing with it to the extent that Al thinks he is. Like I mentioned earlier, I think this is like a there's no such thing as bad publicity incident.
yeah,
Um, but I think Al is more so just worried about his reputation. He's worried about feeling like other people aren't viewing him in the way that he wants to be viewed, which is, far more important to Al than the money that he might make off of this
yeah.
endeavor.
So it that makes a lot of sense to me, that they would introduce this into
Somebody
the
who's the
larger.
complete opposite, who cares way more
Yeah.
about the money than how he'll look doing it.
Uh-huh. And in the larger story arc, a young man who starts to gain some popularity with his rap music. I mean, there's some level of reality here, that you would certainly have to deal with social media outlets if you became popular, and the fact that Al hasn't really, come to grips with it yet. I mean, that's part of his developing character, I think, here. And then,
Yeah.
of course, layered on top of all of this is like all the racial, uh, all the confusing racial issues that are going to continue to pop out throughout these episodes. But the the mixed race identity issue thing is specifically is going to come up over and over, and I think that that is definitely intentional by the creators. That there's some message that they're trying to put out there, just about um, identity in general. That maybe it's not so important to draw sharp lines between people and put them in categories, based on the color of their skin, or what you might perceive a person's race to be. Uh, you know that kind of thing is going to come up over and over, and it comes up here. It's a little, I don't know. I think maybe the creators tried to layer too many things on top of each other here, because
I don't know. I think.
like the thing about the N word, that was the second time they introduced that to the audience, right? So they had the white DJ in the second episode, who inappropriately uses the N word in an attempt to be friendly with Earn. Um, that was, at least to me, the white viewer, that seemed inappropriate. Like, even though the guy was being friendly, and Earn, sort of didn't challenge it too much. This scenario where this sort of half black person uses the N word, it's the second time they did that, and so I don't know how many more times we're going to see. I think it's going to come up over and over again, as people using the N word, and then the main characters like stop or do a double take and say, "Wait a minute, should this guy be using the N word?" I mean, uh, I think that's kind of a recurring theme, or not theme, but just a recurring uh, event that's going to happen over and over. So we'll be talking about it some more. What
Yeah.
else? Do we want to wrap it up
I don't know.
there?
Yeah. I mean, I've said everything I really feel like
Yeah,
I need to say on
we're
this
at an
episode.
hour 10. So
I'll just say, I don't feel like they tried to layer too much stuff on top of each other so much. Yeah, I don't know. I felt like I could
yeah,
follow
I guess
everything.
we're maybe just in trying to offer up some good conversation, I'm overthinking it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think that'll do it for this episode.
All right. So I hope it's the interest is growing. I hope people are watching the most recently dropped episodes. I think they're coming. Season 4 is coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to say something about that?
I don't know. I mean, we're gonna see how this whole thing shakes out. If it ends up seeming to be advantageous for us to like speed up uploads on these to like catch up with season 4, so that we can start talking about it as it's airing, I guess we'll try to do that. But I don't think we know when season 4 is dropping yet, so we're just gonna have to play it by ear, I think.
Yeah, it'd be great if people viewed the episodes in sequence and followed along with our
I mean,
podcast,
that's the way I've been assuming people are viewing these.
Yeah. I mean, that's well, I mean, just as far as the frequency with which we drop these podcasts, I mean, I don't know if our audience would prefer them once a week, or what. We can maybe solicit some input about that, but I do know that
the once a week thing, if you're asking me, because like I know I was mostly the determiner for that kind of thing. The once a week thing was so that it would be at a manageable rate to create these, because I have stuff going on outside of this podcast.
What? You mean you have a life outside of this?
Shockingly. As well as being able to fit into people's schedules relatively well. Podcasts tend to come out on a weekly formula for this reason, because like when you if you just drop them kind of whenever, or like every couple days, especially podcasts that are as long as these ones, sometimes people just aren't even going to be able to keep up with them. And also because having them be too far apart isn't good for the YouTube algorithm, so it's kind of trying to hit a sweet spot between all of those factors. And it also just so happens that this is a show which airs weekly, so it feels kind of appropriate to cover it weekly.
But if you want the bonus coverage or the advanced
I didn't mention the Patreon coverage. So Patreon, we got tier 1, that's $5. That'll get you a shout out at the end of each episode and a very personal thank you from each of us. Tier 1, that's $5. That'll get you a personal thank you and shout out at the end of episodes from us. Tier 2 is $10 a month. That'll get you access to 2 weeks early of the AtlantaCast. You will have access to episodes 2 weeks before they drop on YouTube. And then the third tier, that is $15. That will grant you access to bonus episodes of the AtlantaCast, which will include stuff like Childish Gambino music videos. And also we're planning on doing the film not Kauai Island. It's Guava Island. Yeah. That's a film that a bunch of the Atlanta crew and cast did working together, I think. So we'll definitely have to make sure to check that one out and discuss it. But I think with that said, we're going to check out for this episode. See you guys next week, hopefully.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.